welcome back for another Naval History edition of the Proceedings podcast, made possible by the generous support of the William Wood Foundation. I'm Eric Mills, the editor-in-chief of Naval History magazine, and today, on the eve of February 2023, we gather for kind of a special reason today. That's to honor something that happened in recent history 20 years ago, in February 2003, and it looks at something that ties into what we do here in naval history and the larger picture of the news at the time. 20 years ago was the Columbia Space Shuttle disaster, and that has a specific tie-in with the Naval Academy, where we're located, and the larger story of what we do when we talk about naval history. From his days as a cross-country team captain to his later role as a NASA pilot, Willie McCool inspired those around him. And today, a memorial honors the memory of a life tragically curtailed. And we join in honoring that memory today on the eve of the anniversary of the Columbia Shuttle disaster. And joining us today is a frequent contributor to the magazine, William Prom. Bill usually writes Age of Sail material for us. He's one of our current, really valued Age of Sail authors. But this time, Bill, you did something different. You did something from modern history, and it's a compelling story. It's a very moving story, as anybody who's read the current issue will know. But maybe you can tell us about how you got involved in this particular story of Willie McCool.
Absolutely. It's definitely a little different, kind of traded out Age of Sail for Space Age with this. And it's very different actually interviewing people involved in the topic rather than relying on manuscripts that are 200 years old and things of that nature. But yeah, this was a very personal story to me. I never knew Willie McCool personally. I was in high school at the time of the Columbia disaster. I knew more of it because of Laurel Clark, who was another crew member on the Columbia. She grew up in Racine, Wisconsin. I grew up in the Milwaukee area. So she was kind of a hometown hero for a lot of us then. And I really didn't know much of Willie McCool until I went to the Naval Academy. I was on the cross country and track team there, and he was a legend, still is, on the team, and is a big part of team heritage. And I was there at a time when the memorial that is currently up on the course and that I discuss in the article was being designed and then eventually dedicated. It was during my second class year that the dedication was there, and I imagine we'll get into that. But this is it's a much more personal topic than most of the things that I've discussed. McCool is a hero to most people that know him and know of him. It was one of the most refreshing things in the course of all the interviews that I did for this, just how genuinely admired he was, and just how genuine of a person he was, that really lived up to the lore. And there's nothing but wonderful things that people had to share and say about him. And especially knowing we had kind of a tighter timeline in completing this project, and knowing when I would reach out to people that knew him, kind of starting with my inner network, just how many dropped everything they could to kind of help contribute to this and then pass me on to others as well. That it's really that collaborative love of him that really made this possible.
Yeah, it comes through in your article quite clearly, the different phases of the life and career of Willie McCool. To everybody around him, he had a personality that just seemed to radiate. And he really blazed a trail that left that impression on people throughout his time here and to his later endeavors. Why don't you go ahead, now that we set the table, and discuss the story of Willie McCool, starting his days at the Academy.
Yeah, so Willie McCool grew up really all over. Graduated from high school in Lubbock, Texas, but spent a good time in Guam. His father was an aviator in the Navy. And that's where really a large part of his story that just couldn't fit in this started there. That's where he met his future wife that is a big part of his life, obviously, through that, but just couldn't fit into this story for the space. But regardless, Willie McCool was an accomplished runner already when he made it to the Naval Academy. One notable race of his in high school was actually beating former President George W. Bush in a cross country race, apparently. But anyway, so he's at the Naval Academy, very accomplished both on the field, the track, and in academics. He spent most of his time first in his class, actually, at the Naval Academy, graduated second with one minor demerit. Got caught running back on the yard with his shirt untucked, is my understanding. I could also say that's probably just the only time he was caught as well. But he was a very highly regarded midshipman, always generous with his time, and to help out anyone struggling academically or athletically. As far as on the team, because that's what I focus most of this on, it was rather unremarkable, honestly, to start off with. He was just one of the herd. That's what all plebes or freshmen are at the Naval Academy, and in most sports, honestly, but cross country especially. And he eventually kind of distinguished him there. There's a memorable story with Coach Cantello asking him how dedicated he was to the sport. And McCool sat and wondered, like, I think it was like 25% or something like that he said. And Al was quite irate with that idea. He's telling him, you're never going to have a history in that. Like, you're never going to make it on the team with that attitude. And McCool is one of the few that found a way to strike that balance of the academic and athletic success. And he became more dedicated to the team, rose through the ranks of the team, eventually becoming team captain. And it was in his final year as team captain at the Navy Invite on October 2nd, 1982, or 81, excuse me, that I was correct the first time, 82, that we have a more monumental race. It wasn't his greatest race ever or anything like that, but it's an important part to this story. And the Navy Invite generally hasn't been the biggest race of the year. It's usually earlier in the season than October, actually. But this year was particularly stacked. You had several ranked teams in Syracuse and Georgetown in attendance, and cross-country runners of the year, already a multiple-time All-American. I think he would still get 3 more All-American spots by the end of his collegiate career, was going to be there. And people knew that he probably couldn't beat O'Connell, but there was still a chance that the team could win, just the way that the race is scored. And long story short, gun goes off. It's great weather. O'Connell wins, sets a course record, an incredible one that stood for 25 years. In fact, it took future Boston and LA Marathon winner and Kenyan General Assemblyman Wesley Career to beat that time in 2007. I was lucky enough to be in the race, nowhere near his time, however. I was a bit further back. But anyways, McCool was he's in that race, and he's setting a pace that stood as a marker for the rest of the team. And even though O'Connell won, Navy still beat these ranked teams that year. That was quite the accomplishment. And when I was a midshipman on the team, it was McCool's time that really was kind of that marker of how you stack as far as the history of the team goes. That we keep this list of top times on the course, top times at other courses or in period. And when I started, I think McCool was at the 24th mark on that. And since others have passed his time as well, but we always keep his time on there because we judge our success really based on him, especially with the placement of that memorial that we'll get to.
You mentioned he also was academically excellent here. And the real theme, the sort of starting and end point of your story, quite compellingly, is the memorial monument that stands to him here in Annapolis. But he's also remembered here in another way too, right? And that is there's an academic excellence award named in his honor to this day. He was
Yes.
ahead of his class for a large part of the time, right? I mean,
Yes, and continued to basically at every school he went to after that. Because after graduating, he quickly got a master's degree at University of Maryland and remained close to the team during that time. In fact, it was during that period as an ensign going to Maryland that he was introduced to Ronnie Harris, who is one of the best athletes from the Naval Academy cross country team ever, and that he had actually picked up Ronnie Harris from the airport, flying in from California to start plebe summer, and was really his introduction to the Naval Academy, and kind of formed a bond and was a bit of a mentor for him. And it was Harris was the one that eventually came up with the concept of the memorial and where it is. But that's a bit of a digression in what you were going at with the academics, and that so he gets that master's degree, goes on to flight school, graduating top of his class there, gets to select whatever he wants to choose, and goes for Prowlers, the A6B at the time. He wants that. It's a difficult airframe to fly. There's a more command opportunity was one of his responses for why he chose that option. Eventually going to test pilot school, where he's also graduating top of his class, and I believe there's the honor graduate there is now named after him as well. And even other honors academically for him in the Houston Alumni Association for the Naval Academy gives a Smith-McCool trophy named after Mike Smith of Challenger and Willie McCool of Columbia. It's a sword that goes to the highest ranked first class midshipman from the area every year.
it's very very fitting. Well, why don't we talk about what he does after he leaves the academy? His career track that leads him to NASA eventually.
Yes, yeah. So in the story, I really focus in on one specific event during his time as a naval aviator. After test pilot school, when he's at Pax River, he was preparing for additional tests for the what was it going to be, the ADCAP EA6B that wanted to take the airframe out for a test run, basically just trying to stall. It was a fly to stall test where they went out over the water and he'd go up at high angle and just bring it back. But then one of the times, I believe it was maybe like the third attempt, the left engine starts to stall and does stall. And based on the high angle of attack, the thrust coming from the right engine, the stalled left engine, it led to the aircraft quickly getting into a fast spin. They were in a rect spin of 15 to 20 degrees, nose down. I was lucky enough to get in touch with Nancy Fetchtig, the NFO that sat to his right. The A6B has 4 seats in it. They had 2 additional NFOs sitting behind them. But she was gracious enough to spend some time with me to relive this event. And as she explained, the world just starts spinning around them. Her NATOPS starts floating up in the air and is quickly grabbing it. And one of the things that she remarks about this, and it's part of the reason that I included in this story and how it relates to his time on Columbia, is just the kind of cool, calm, collected attitude that he had through it, that there was no sense of panic at all. When the fall started, or the spin started, they were at about 18,000 feet, which was about 8,000 feet above where they should eject if the aircraft isn't in control. And he immediately launches into the emergency procedures to try and correct it. He's going through the checklist, flipping every switch, flipping every toggle, whatever it is that he needs to do. And he gets into the assist spin recovery, where they're going into the extended throws so he can try and correct it. Goes through all that and nothing happens. So now at a point where most rational people would probably have already been panicking, certainly then, when you've done every step you're supposed to and nothing is happening. And you're in this 30,000 pound aircraft just spinning rapidly, falling down, and notices one little light isn't illuminated, that the toggle didn't seed. So quickly goes through the steps again. This time it works, and he's beginning to correct it. But the way Nancy described it, there's no way, no visual cues, just looking out the window to tell that they're slowing down at all. They had this one indicator, it was rate. Jida described just how it was pegged out for the longest time, and it maxed at 100 spins a second, I think, or I mean a minute, sorry. And slowly started to see it creep down as they're going lower and lower. They're calling out the altitude. They've passed that 10,000 foot threshold where they're supposed to eject if they're not in control. But Willie is still calmly claiming that, stating, "I've got it." And they are able to pull it out and correct it. That they had fallen probably about 12,000 feet. So correcting it around that 6,000 foot mark there, and brought it out of that spin. One of the things that Nancy reflected to me was that there had been, at this point, this was like the 10th or 11th Prowler to stall and go into a spin like this. None of them have been recovered up to this point. In fact, there was an incident at Whidbey Island about a month earlier where they went into a spin, the crew ejected, everyone survived, although one person, one of the NFOs, I believe, their hand struck the cockpit on the way out, actually had to be amputated afterwards. So the procedures were fresh in everyone's mind for this, but yeah, it was the first time that the spin was able to be recovered. And remember her also relating that, one of her early thoughts is like, oh, we're all in our dry suits as they're out over the water, not really looking forward to dropping into the cold water out there. Thankfully, didn't have to.
It's just really remarkable, isn't it, when you hear that account? How do you maintain your sang-froid and your analytical mind just calmly focused while you're spinning 100 times a minute, descending rapidly? It's remarkable, and it's also remarkably prescient for the sort of culminative thing in his life and career, which we'll get to in a minute. But just that, I guess that embodies what you'd call grace under pressure. It's quite a phenomenal thing to read, and it's really great for the sake of the story and for history that you got to talk with his Nancy Fechtig, who was in there with him, and get that firsthand account from the person sitting right next to him when this occurred. And
absolutely,
yeah, I mean, it's everything he touched so far has been like he's just had a Midas touch with it, and so he advances from aviator to NASA. So why don't we talk about how that comes about?
Yes, yeah. So shortly after, he goes back to the fleet and applies for NASA flight program, is accepted, was actually hesitant about accepting it because I think they were on their last at-sea training period before deployment on the Enterprise, I believe. And I walked into his CO telling him that he had gotten accepted for this and was worried he'd be letting everyone down by taking this. But thankfully he was convinced, no, you don't pass on an opportunity like NASA, and he's clearly qualified for it. And his first mission that he was selected for was STS-107 Columbia. And it was one that kept getting delayed, whether it was Hubble repairs, there was an emergency resupply of ISS. There was another issue with Columbia itself, I think in the fuel line or something, that had to be corrected, that their workup schedule essentially just kept getting extended. It ended up being one of the longest training periods for a shuttle crew up to that time. So it really made for a very tight-knit family. From my understanding, generally already happens for these crews just because of the amount of time they're spending together, but even more so in this case. And this was going to be one of the first purely scientific missions for a long time for NASA, just because of the, again, repairs to Columbia, building up, the construction of ISS. So they weren't going to be going to ISS. They didn't even have the docking platform in the shuttle for that. So as we all know at this point, kind of looking back, when Columbia did launch, it had that bit of the insulation that struck the left wing on the heat panels that just made enough of an error, or enough of a crack in it, essentially, that's what eventually doomed the shuttle. Now, it was recognized, like it was identified during the takeoff that had occurred and while they were in space, but it was understood that there really wasn't anything that could be done at this point, because again, they had no way to access ISS to try and use that as a lifeboat. They wouldn't be able to get another shuttle out, and it was essentially deemed as like, it's probably inconsequential, and let's continue with the mission. And that's what they did. So there were about 80 different experiments they had done over the course of about 16 days, I believe, on the mission. And everything, other than that one incident during takeoff, everything kind of continued as planned. And when it came to re-entry, they went into the schedule of events as normal. Again, no issues. And I even call out in the description of their re-entry that they're in the big orange jumpsuits. Now, those actually weren't, in the image there, when the shuttle was originally designed, the astronauts weren't intended to wear those for takeoff and re-entry. It was seen as like, to treat this like a plane. They're being their actual flight suits. It was after Challenger that became the norm, that they would have these for an additional emergency evacuation purposes. But the problem is the cockpit wasn't redesigned for these bulkier uniforms. So it was not uncommon to accidentally hit a toggle that you didn't intend to. And that's exactly what happened with Commander Hubbard. He accidentally hit one of the autopilot toggles, I believe. It didn't cause any issue. And I only call it out because that was a problem that they recognized immediately and went on. So it was essentially that even when things went wrong, everything seemed fine for this. So as they continued into their descent, they're going about Mach 24, Mach 25 through this. So incredible speeds. It's almost 3,000 degrees, I think, like 2,800 degrees Fahrenheit outside as they're starting to enter the atmosphere. You can actually watch some of the video. It's available online of the cockpit during this period, and you can see they're suited up. Some in the back seat don't have their gloves on as they're going through the checklist with everyone. They're even cracking jokes. Willie points out the plasma burn outside the cockpit, and Hubbard responds, I wouldn't want to be out there. and they're joking, who wanted to be out there to begin with? So again, they're oblivious to the fact that something is about to go wrong. And it's shortly after that they're performing the first roll for energy management, and they're reaching that peak heating. They're still about over 200,000 feet up, going Mach 24 still, but that's as scheduled, no issues. But one of the reaction control system jets starts firing. These are essentially little automated jets that will just do little spurts here and there to try and help correct. And they're not necessarily alerted that those are going off. That's just part of how the descent occurs. But this is starting to occur because of the degradation of that left wing. A crack had formed from that debris that had fallen during takeoff, and it was allowing this super hot gas to get in and start degrading systems. And it was at this point, it wasn't necessarily messing with telemetry that much, or not so much that the RCS jets couldn't help correct it. And so they're continuing on in the descent. They're passing through like over California in 59 seconds, going Mach 23. I had an account in here where reading an interview of his father talking about seeing that they're living in the Las Vegas area at the time. Both he and his wife, I believe, were professors there at UNLV, and they're watching Columbia take like seeing the fireball go over in the sky, calling Willie's sister in Florida, who's there for the landing, to say that he's on his way. And then going from Nevada into Texas, they're still going as expected, but then more errors are starting to pop up. All of a sudden, they're getting shorts in systems they weren't expecting. There were a lot of these were cases that they had trained for. Like one of the examples was they were getting an alert that they're like low tire pressure in the left landing gear. That's something they'd seen before, but not in all four tires. That they were getting kind of novel errors at this point. The things that shouldn't be lining up the way they are. It wasn't as simple as a shorted fuse. That's generally what it ended up being in training. And more of these would start happening, and more of the RCS jets started firing. It eventually got to the point that they were no longer just doing the little spurts, but just firing continuously at this point. Again, something that shouldn't be happening. And they're going over Dallas at this point at about 200,000 feet. And it's around then that Mission Control receives their final message from Columbia. It was just a Roger to a question that had been asked and that they were going to go and search for. And outages, radio silence at this point isn't necessarily unexpected, but it was certainly concerning for those on the ground. They had, with this mounting list of error messages that they were receiving, at this point, there was debris shedding and debris shedding that could be seen from the ground. The first video capture of it was prior to this point. And then a master alarm set off, and all of these major errors started presenting themselves to the crew, and McCool and Hubbard specifically, really in a matter of a minute. So very much like when he was in the Prowler, that's part of why I include this in here, is that they start going through those checklists that everyone knows, like NASA, naval aviators, you have these checklists that you go through for a reason. And they start identifying what these errors could be. And as they're going, and some of this had to be pieced through from the recovered material, that it was around this point that we stopped receiving data from Columbia. So everything then had to be pieced together, again, from the wreckage. And one of the recovered pieces was the R2 panel, which was one just to the right of McCool as the pilot. On his right side, it was one that had folded in on itself after the disaster, or after the explosion, and it helped kind of keep it intact. So it was at this point there was a depressurization occurred. The shuttle started to corkscrew as the more debris fell, and started spinning about 30 to 40 degrees per second, kind of with that belly going in the velocity vector as they're in where they're heading. So they're in an uncontrolled, non-ballistic or uncontrolled ballistic trajectory, going about 15 or Mach 15 with no hydraulic pressure. That was from the damage that left wing. They were losing hydraulic pressure, which would have allowed McCool as the pilot to try and correct that. And from what we can tell from the recovered wreckage, is he's identifying that one of the APU's auxiliary power units was running, but that there was no pressure in it going from that. It's not a lot. It's mostly meant just keep fluid circulating in space so that nothing's freezing up. But he knew that it was something that he could try. So he's going through this list of toggles to try and repressurize that. And now this is actually something that isn't part of the checklist that they have, but it's from an expert knowledge of the shuttles or the orbiter systems and how they work, and that he was continuing to fight the problem to the very end. That they had essentially exhausted everything that was in the book, so now he was going out of it using, again, that expert knowledge that we know he had from all of his academic success, that he knew everything that could be done with this platform. Again, going back to that extensive training period that they had as a shuttle crew, that they were, even though it was his first mission, he was so highly prepared for this. And but it wasn't going to be enough. And that if they couldn't have known that it was the final moments when the depressurization happened, but it didn't stop him, and that's part of his legacy, and really is that he continued to fight that to the very end. And that's really kind of what goes into all of these stories, that it goes back to his time as a midshipman on the course, that he knew he couldn't beat someone like Jim O'Connell, but he knew that he could help his team still win. And so that it's a through line through these stories. And that's really what it helps spark the inspiration for his memorial on the course, which the article starts off with talking about how the Naval Academy is littered, almost for a lack of a better term, with memorials and monuments all over. It's a wonderful reminder, honestly, for midshipmen walking from Bancroft to class. You can't not be reminded of the deeds of your forebears and what everyone has done before you. Can you live up to it? But I still think that McCool's on the cross-country course is really the most personal and most moving of all of them. Now, I had mentioned earlier that Ronnie Harris, a mentee of McCool's, was the one that kind of first came up with the idea. That shortly after this happened, he and many of the other graduates that knew McCool had been in contact with Al Cantello, who was still coach at the time, they needed to do something to help remember him. And it eventually struck Ronnie Harris that, you know what, Columbia blew up 16 minutes from their scheduled reentry. Why don't we figure out where McCool would have been on the course on that day that he ran his best, 16 minutes from finish? So they mapped out the course based on his pace and identified where he'd be about 8 minutes and 27 seconds into his fastest time on the course. So puts so this marker, it's a big stone tablet where you have a side facing the road with Willie McCool in bronze, an image in bronze of him there. It's surrounded by 7 stars for the 7 astronauts. There's a quote of McCool's from when he was in space talking down about John Lennon's song Imagine, actually, and trying to look at the world without borders. And then on the reverse side, facing the course, essentially where the path that the runners would be coming up, it just reads 16 minutes from home. And it's something that you pass by twice on the course, but I was lucky enough in my first class year or senior year to race on the course the first time that was there. And it is truly inspiring to have that as that reminder, really just daring you. Can you be as good as Willie McCool? And it's something that I think back to it, not just for athletic pursuits, like can I run as fast, but can I be as daring? Can I work as hard? Can I live up to this example that we're so lucky that he provided? And that's honestly what I get from a lot of people in talking about him for this project. And I remarked on it earlier, just the outpouring of support to help write this from everyone that knew him. Really, it speaks volume to him as a character.
It definitely does. And the placement of that monument is a poignant and perfect idea. And he clearly remains and will remain an example to aspire to. And that memorial does him honor. And now's a good time for us all to remember him on the anniversary of that catastrophe, that he kept trying to the bitter end. And in the end, it was all beyond their control on some technical level. But the fact that even past all the protocols, all the checklists, he was still saying that the only logical conclusion can be this. And he never gave up. That's perhaps the most shining gift he gave as an example to those who follow. So thank you, Bill, for very much for bringing alive the memory of Willie McCool. Gone but not forgotten. And thank you for joining us. And I hope to have you again in the magazine very soon. I guess that's it for us, folks, for today. Thank you for joining us for another Naval History edition of the Proceedings podcast. I'm Eric Mills. Until next time.